Well, welcome to Get a Better Handle on Life. I'm Barry Winbolt, and today I'm speaking to Michele Mason about her exhilarating, it might seem an odd word, but exhilarating book entitled, memoir entitled Annihilating Anorexia. I've had a quick chat with Michele while we were preparing for this, and I'm blown away already. So I hope this conversation is very enlightening, and I hope there might be a few sacred cows knocked off their perch along the way. So, hello, Michele. You're in Arizona, I believe. So,
Yes. Hello, Barry, and thank you for your kind words, and thank you for inviting me. It's a wonderful opportunity to share my story and hopefully be a positive message today.
Thank you. In a nutshell, in a little potted history, could you tell us about how you experienced anorexia? What's your story?
Yes, my book covers it pre, during, and after. The one thing I would say is if I had $1 for every time someone said to me, "Why don't you just eat something?" when I had it. I was 16 years old in 1981 in a small town, and no one knew what it was back then. And they go, "Why don't you just eat something?" And what I've learned in my journey in my life is it is complex. I believe it's a brain illness. I believe it's not people's fault, that it's not something you can just say, "Okay, I'm going to eat today." It's a very complex illness. And there's actually research that's coming out that there's front centers of the brain that are different in anorexics, that biological piece coupled with environmental triggers. And in my case, it was my mother. She was not capable of being a parent, and she was very critical of you. And the opening of my book, I was 14 years old. I was with a group of friends. She comes into the room and she looks at me and says, "You're fat." And I don't know where that came from or what that was, but that right there, whatever was pre-wired in my brain, it went off like a Christmas tree. And so 14 years old, and then some other very significant changes occurred in my environment over the next year, moving to a new place as a family. And then when I was 15 years old, it started. 8 months later, I'm in the hospital because I'm 5'11" and I'm 100 pounds, and it became life-threatening. And I could feel it. I could feel everything starting to shut down. An analogy I'll use is, I think most people have seen the movie Titanic, and at the beginning of the movie, the old Rose, she comes onto the boat, and they turn on the tape recorder and they say, "Take us back to Titanic." And Rose says, "It's been 84 years since I was on the Titanic, and I can still smell the fresh paint. It's been 43 years since I've had anorexia," and not to say that, it's not a Titanic thing, but it's horrific. And I can still feel the gnawing hunger and the weakness and not knowing if I have enough strength to get through my day because I'm just so thin. And it's the worst thing, hands down, that ever happened to me. I was 16 years old. Now I'm 59. It's the absolute worst thing that ever happened to me. And so I think one of the most important things that I try to get through my book is I'm a good example. I made it. I beat it. But also, it's very complex. Don't underestimate this illness, whatever you do.
So you beat anorexia, to use your term. You annihilated it in the title of your memoir. So do you think you are now free of anorexia? Have you been free of anorexia for 43 years, would you say?
Yes, Barry. I buried it for 4 decades. I buried it. I think might be one of those things where you have a trauma and your brain just kind of shoves it to a back closet somewhere. And then my parents died. And guess what? It all bubbled up like a like a pot on the stove. It just boiled over. And I have to tell you, there was a lot of expletives running through my my head going, are you blankety blankety kidding me? I buried this for 4 decades. I want to pretend it never happened. But my parents died. And that triggered, it all came out. And then I saw, obviously, we had a global pandemic. And it was very hard for me to, when it came back up, to deal with it all, because it's so much easier to just bury it. But I thought, trying to help other people is more important than my discomfort. And also, to directly address one of your talking points, once I recovered from anorexia, I never relapsed, but I never felt about food the same way ever again. You can talk to any woman on the street, and there's emotional eating, and there's so much pressure to look good when you're a woman in today's society. I think everyone has some issues to some extent, but I never looked at it the same way again. And I'm nostalgic for those days when I was a kid, and I'm out playing, doing sports because I'm an athlete, and I'm hungry, I'm gonna dive into this meal. So it changed me in that sense, but I know what the illness is. I know what to do, and I'm stronger than the illness. I remember being 16 and going, I'm not giving up. I'm not giving up my life. I haven't even started yet. And so I got a little angry, and I decided that I'm not going to succumb to this, but it did change me.
So you decided, you mentioned 16, the onset was 15, you mentioned 16. How long did you suffer? And was there tell us about moving on from anorexia.
Yes, it was 8 months. So towards the end of the summer of my 15th year, 1980, and then I went into the hospital in March of 1981. I was in the hospital for 3 months. I was in the medical unit of the hospital for 2 weeks. And then the rest of the time I was in the mental health unit, which was just garden variety. It was everybody. Because there were no eating disorder treatment centers. The first one was in Pittsburgh in 1985. So this is 1981. There were no, and so I went in there. No one else looked like me. There were no young girls, people screaming, people, in straight jackets and whatnot. I was scared out of my mind. And I think that the turning point for me, and I write about this in the book, I'm in there, and again, I can't give up. I haven't even started yet. And I think that they put me on antidepressants, and there was a couple really good people that work there, healthcare professionals that took an interest in me and started, for lack of a better way to say it, kind of giving me the things my mother couldn't give me. You're doing okay. You're going to be okay. We want you to get better. My mom didn't even visit me when I was in there, except for one time.
Really?
So, yeah, she just wasn't capable. She didn't want to deal with it. And so I got out of the hospital, and it was hard, and I had to relearn, because anyone that's an anorexic will tell you there's rituals. There are rituals that control your day. It's like being pulled in by a riptide, and you can't get out. Can
you describe what you mean by can you give me an example of a ritual, or the sort of ritual you mean? I mean, yes. I'm sure anorexics will understand exactly what you mean, but those of us who haven't been in that position.
My lunch that I would take to school every day, and I would eat the same exact thing every day, was half of a peanut butter sandwich. Okay. And in addition to depression, which is a comorbidity of anorexia, I also had OCD, which is very common. And so when I made my half sandwich, it had to be the exact thickness of peanut butter every single day. And I would play with it until I thought it was right. Any more, any less, no. And then I would take it to school, and I had to eat it a certain way. And God bless my friends, they didn't know what to do. And it's your ritual, your control, your structure, it's your lifeline. And that's what I did every day. And then I had maybe an apple later on, and over 8 months, I shrunk. You can't live on that when you're 16 years old.
No. And you were quite a tall and lanky 16-year-old by the sounds of it. 5'11", you said?
Yes, and I was an athlete. I played basketball, and I talk about that in the book as well. There came a point where I couldn't play basketball anymore. The coach came up to me and he put his hand on my back and he said, and here you go. He said, Michelle, you need to eat something. And it was like, it's more complex than that. And I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed because I didn't want to call attention to myself.
Yeah, you still had friends during this period. Your friends were still kind of around you. They didn't understand, but you had social interaction with your peers.
Yes.
You hadn't isolated yourself. You kept going, and you were still playing sport as long as you could.
And I isolated myself at home, Barry. I would go in my room and just not associate with my family. And I don't know why, but nobody in my family knew what to do.
As a parent of 4 kids, I would say that's pretty average teenage behavior to some extent. Right. Certainly not wishing to diminish what you were going through. But, I think that's a very interesting point, isn't it? That especially at that age, 13, 14, 15 through to maybe 18 or something, those growing years are so important and so much is going on and there's so many influences from so many directions. And one is so impressionable and all of that stuff that's going on. So it must be quite hard to untangle kind of normal developmental behavior from illness-related behavior. In your case, perhaps it wasn't the case because your mother was, it sounds like, neglectful of you, certainly emotionally, but it can happen that occasionally when parents think something is wrong, they will start to go the other way. They'll start to look at normal behavior as being a problem. An example was that I knew somebody a few years ago whose daughter was in great difficulty, and the parents kept saying, just talk to us about it, just talk to us about it. And she said later, that was the last thing I wanted to do because I was ashamed, I didn't have the words, I didn't fully understand it. And this constant badgering pushed me away. I know they meant well, and she talked to her mother about it later. She was 23, 24 when I spoke to her. But she said, she gave exactly that example that over-concern by people, or over-concern is the wrong word, but the concern translated into something which was not helpful to her, although it was for the best of intentions. And I remember one other observer saying at the time, look, leave her to have a personal life. Leave her to have her privacy. That's still important, even though she's going through this difficult time. So what do you think about that? What do you think about your situation while you were at home with your parents?
Well, what you're saying is really something that rings true with me, and it is very teenagers with your children. It's very complicated. I want to point out, though, that whether the parent is absent or attentive or under nurturing or over nurturing or maybe that middle ground or that perfect, there is no such thing on finding the balance. So whether they're under or over, if you have a kid that has anorexia, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. With anorexia, obviously, once the person starts shrinking, there's a problem. That's what saved me. One of the key symptoms of anorexics, they say, is that the person has a distorted body image. Like they'll look in the mirror and say, I look fat. Well, in my case, no, absolutely. That's false. I looked in the mirror. I knew what was happening. I was afraid, but I didn't know what it was. And ultimately, that's what saved me. I started looking like I was going to blow away in the wind. And I think my father said to my mom, you better take her to the doctor. And this was in March of 1981. We're near Canada on the East Coast of the United States. Cold, dark, dreary, pretty much my mood, right? And my mother grudgingly took me to our family doctor. And the doctor, this is in the book, he asked me to stand up, take my shirt off, and put my hands, make a T with my hands. So I'm standing up and my arms are out. And he's looking at me from the back. And he says to my mother, he says, she has to go to the hospital now. And that's what saved me. He knew what it was. And he told her she's got to go.
I'm Barry Winwell, and you're listening to Get a Better Handle on Life. If you're finding this podcast interesting, please support me by sharing this with someone you know, or by following me on any of the usual platforms. Thank you. So, Michele, you went to hospital, and what happened next? What happened when you got there?
Fortunately, I didn't have to do the IV. I know a lot of anorexics do. But in my case, getting on the antidepressants and all that really helped me to get stronger.
So how did you, I'll come back in a minute to sort of the intervening years, because 43 years is a long time to kind of, as you said, 4 decades burying it. And then now you've written the book. Well, when did you write the book? July last year it was published. So that's a big gap, and I'd like to know what the kind of trigger for that was. But for people listening, what about, okay, so you're in hospital, you go into hospital because you're not eating and because you're underweight and your life's at risk. You spend 3 months, some of it in the mental health, in an extremely stressful and scary situation, which could be quite an incentive for somebody to get better, to get out, I guess you could argue. It's scary for a young girl, a young woman to be in that sort of position, as you said. And somehow, what were the steps to when you started?
I started to have, for lack of a better word, light bulb moments. And I had 15 of them, and I put them all in the book. This is what I learned. Oh, it got that way, Barry, but all I can tell you is that the book just came out, okay? I'm not an author. It just came out. And one story I'll share, I mean, there's a lot of funny stuff that happened in that mental health unit. There was a guy that asked me out on a date. He thought I worked there. I go, no, I'm a patient. I can't go out with you right now because I'm trying to get better. And I had I mentioned earlier, one of the healthcare professionals. I was sitting in my room in the dark, just sitting there. I was having a bad day. And she came in and she sat with me. And she said, I know your mom doesn't come to visit you, and I'm sorry. And the light bulb moment there was, I'm worthy of kindness.
That must have been a really significant moment.
It was. She held space for me. And that's so important today. If you can do that for someone, people are oversaturated with noise and information and social media. If someone's struggling, and by the way, everybody is with something, if you can just hold space for them. And that's what she did. And I had never experienced that before. And I learned, I go, you know what? She's sitting with me. And then the voice of anorexia kicked in, which is a character in the book. And the anorexia voice said, she's paid to sit with you, you idiot. And I responded, shut up, AN. I'm worthy of kindness. And it was just little things like that, just as I went along. And I kind of saw people being kind and people, giving me that nurturing and that positive reinforcement that I so desperately needed. And then I came to the point where no one is responsible for me except myself. I have to do it. I have to choose. They can give me some pills. They can be nice to me, but I have to do it. And so one of the other moments I had was I chose anorexia to see how strong I was. And I'm here to tell you and your listeners that, I'm 59 years old and I've had a lot of, divorce and job loss and other stuff happen like everybody does. But nothing in my life was as hard as that was. Nothing even comes close. And I was only 16 years old. So it made me strong.
And therefore, in a way, you've got that experience behind you for everything else, every other challenge you face in life.
Yes.
Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And I'm very struck by the kindness, as you mentioned it, of that care worker who was in the mental hospital who came and sat with you, because one of the threads that runs through many of the interviews and certainly all of my work is that I get pretty angry about our powerlessness in society to help people with, say, depression or with so many other conditions because we're scared off by it. And one of the things I hear quite often is, in the public, generally around and about the place, is, well, I would have helped, but I'm not qualified. And that's when my hackles go up. And I got the line. I was talking to a guy at the swimming pool one day, and I saw him regularly. I didn't know him particularly. He said, I've been asked to give this support in a voluntary organization, but I'm not qualified. And I said, since when were you not qualified to be a human being? And you have just so eloquently described that process of being present and being with the other person, even if, as the carer, you feel completely out of your depth and scared by it. That's just a learning moment for the carer. And I suppose it takes courage, but it's really so simple to be human with another human being if we don't lose it and if we dare to do it. And I just thank you for that story, because that's such an eloquent way of putting it.
Yes, and what I want to share is as you said, it's something anybody can do, but it made a big impact on me, more so than that person will ever know. And if you're someone that someone that she or he you think may have anorexia or an eating disorder of some kind, and you don't know what to do, they're going to fight you. They're going to, don't mess with my rituals. Don't mess with my stuff. Don't mess with my control. Because remember, anorexia has you in the riptide. Anorexia has you in its clutches. And people get angry when people try to come in and help them. Just from my experience, maybe some others will agree with that. And so if you can just be there for them, just be there and hold space and say, you know what, I just want to listen, and I want to just, whatever you want to share, whatever if you don't want to talk about it right now, just know I'm here and I'm holding space for you. It might not work the first 9 times, but maybe it'll work the 10th time. Maybe you'll break through.
Yeah, I guess, it's all about being present and being a rock. And if you're in that position of being somebody supporting, accompanying, whatever word you want to use, somebody with a disorder that you don't understand, and it might be depression, it might be an eating disorder. It just requires resilience, extreme patience, remembering that we don't know anything on the outside. I have this voice on my shoulder that says, you don't know anything. There was a guy in a British TV series called Fawlty Towers, and there's a man in that, who was a Spanish waiter, who said, I know nothing the whole time. And I have to remind myself of that and just sit there and be present. And I think that is a very important thing. But it's very easy, especially if you're not a professional, to get impatient with that family member. And part of that impatience maybe is because we're also scared for the eventual result if we can't help. When we feel helpless, we start.
And again, to just not underestimate the illness, because anorexia does have a 20% mortality rate. It has the highest mortality rate of any eating disorder, simply because you're shrinking and your body can't sustain that. And if that doctor hadn't have told my mother I had to go to the hospital, I would have died. I mean,
Yeah.
but I was meant to survive, and I was meant, I think, to be an example. And it's just so bad. People, people tend to think it's society driven, it's social media driven, and it's something that you just can, oh, it's a fad. It's not. It's a serious illness.
You're listening to Get a Better Handle on Life. I'm speaking to Michele Mason about her experiences with anorexia. So you buried it for, as you said in your terms, you buried it for 4 decades. You recovered. You had a career, as you told me. You were a professional woman. You had a successful business career, family, all the rest of it. And you'd put it away all that time. You didn't think about it. But it was part of your experience. But then suddenly you become this sort of evangelist. I mean that very positively. You're carrying the banner with a very important message, because I think it's really, really important, more so today than ever in my life, anyway, that I can remember, that we have role models, that we have examples, that we have people who say to us, it doesn't have to be like that. Look, I've come through it. Now, I also know what I call the logic of depression, the logic of anxiety, in this case, the logic of anorexia. You've already talked about it. That AN voice that says to you, yeah, she's only paid to do this. This isn't, and you had the, what Martin Seligman, the psychologist, coined the term disputation. You had the guts to argue with it, the wherewithal to say, I don't want to listen to that. Go away. There are 2 questions here, I suppose. One is, you obviously had some pretty special qualities as a 16-year-old to be able to dominate your thinking like that and take control of it. So let's just take that as read, because we can't know now why that was. But I'd like to acknowledge that. And then something in you said you got back to what? Normal life, and you just buried it, and you went through and did all the rest of the stuff that a normal young woman does and matured and everything. Then your parents died, and then bang, it all comes back. What happened when it came back? How did you know it had come back?
It came back because I was in the room with my mom. She died in 2017. My father died in 2019. And I was in the room with my mom. She was on her deathbed. And she looked beautiful, by the way. I mean, you couldn't even tell she was sick, but she died of colon cancer because she didn't get her screenings. And I'm sitting there going, I wonder if she's going to say something. I wonder if she's going to, and she didn't.
You mean something relating to her upbringing of you?
Yes.
Like, sorry, I made a
bad
job of it or something?
I was wondering if any of that was going to come, any of it, maybe even just a sentence. And it did not. And that's okay. And when she passed, it was very quick. She went quick. I just thought, it's okay. And that's how I knew that the trauma, the scars, whatever, because I just kept telling myself, she's not capable. And by the way, she's not responsible for my happiness. I am. And interestingly enough, again, just a little spiritual piece. I've had a couple dreams after she passed where I feel like she's trying to come through a little bit and do something positive. That she wasn't able to do it while she was here, but she's trying to do a little bit on the other side for those who believe in the spiritual. And my father, the same way. He died in 2019. My father and I had a good relationship. So, but he was the dad, that generation. We don't get feelings. We don't do touchy-feely, And as I said in the book, I said, once my parents died, I felt like the anorexia came full circle. I had it, I buried it, it came back up again. And now I can look at it through the lens of a 59-year-old and see it for what it was and compare it with the then and the now. And there's some good things that have happened since I've had it. There's more awareness of it. People know what it is. But the bad things are there's people saying, oh, you're virtuous if you look like a skeleton. No, hell no. And there's no cure yet. So when they passed and I dealt with all those emotions and I dealt with the grief, I went through grief, I realized that it all came full circle. And that was the last piece in the puzzle that on my anorexia, on my journey, that, burying it is not necessarily a good thing unless you need to do that for self-preservation. And maybe I did. But now it's like, it's a conviction within, Barry, that if I don't take that bad thing and make something good out of it by trying to help people, then it's a wasted opportunity. To truly annihilate it, I have to try and help people.
Okay. So at some point then, you say it reemerged. Does that mean you stopped eating?
No, but I lost 20 pounds. I was still within the healthy range for my weight. And I honestly, I can't even tell you if the weight loss was grief or the anorexia, but when they died, it's like my appetite switch just went off. It turned off. And that could be the brain part of this.
So, isn't there an element of when we have a vulnerability, let's call it that, past experience, a lesion, a problem that we've mastered, we've overcome, but very often, I won't say in most cases, very often when we hit a really stressful period in life, it's not uncommon for these things to revisit at moments like this. You lose both parents and everything that goes with that in quite a short period of time. And particularly when people lose, can I say politely, the offender, the person that caused us grief in our life. And we hope for recognition and understanding, and it doesn't come. And you seem to have handled that very well and realistically, but nevertheless, it's a shock to the system. And our defenses are already down or a bit battered because of what we're going through with the grief. And then, and so you had the wit and the wisdom to recognize what was going on. And you woke up one morning and thought, I'll write a book. You said, by the way, you're not an author, but you clearly are.
Thank you. And as I said, my dad passed in 2019, and then it's 2020 and we're in lockdown here in the United States. And it's the summertime and I'm sitting there going, you know what? I got to do this. I got to do this. I got to do this. And I was so afraid. And the first thing I did was I called the hospital where I was in 1981. And I said, hey, I was a patient there. Do you by any chance have my medical records? And they did. And
wow.
they sent them to me. And I started researching. And it was the first time I had ever seen my medical records, and they were hugely helpful to my story, to my book. And then I started researching online, groups like ANAD and what have we learned in 40 years? What do we know? And I did an interview in 2022 about the brain malfunctioning in an anorexic. And as I said, the book just came out. And so I worked on it really hard. I sent it to my two brothers and I said, read this manuscript and tell me what you think. And they didn't have a clue, Barry, because they didn't know what was going on. And they just came back and said, this is fascinating. And I said, if you don't want me to do it, I won't do it. And they go, no. We wholeheartedly support you. And so there you go. The sibling love that propelled me to continue with this really hard project. And then I went ahead and launched it. And the weight loss, very honestly, I don't know if it was grief or the anorexia or a combination of the two, but I knew I knew enough. And I, again, looking at it through the lens of a 59-year-old, I go, oh, no way. No way is this going to come in. And so I got on track, and it was it's like when you schedule appointments at the gym to go, I scheduled my meals, and I'm like, oh no, there's no way that this is going to happen. I got angry.
So your anger carried you through and gave you the fuel to kind of come back fighting and overcome or push away the risk of lapsing back into something you'd already experienced when you were much younger. There might be, you have a message you want to carry forward. You've written the book with that message. When we first spoke, you told me what that message was. Can you give me some idea? You've mentioned a few times that you want to help. What does help look like? What does it feel like? What is it offering to? And I guess there are two dimensions to that. One is somebody who might be suffering with an eating disorder, not just anorexia, but particularly anorexia, and somebody who might be a family member. So what form does that help take? What message is helpful to them, or messages?
Yes, Barry, thank you for that wonderful opportunity. I want people to know that it's not your fault. Treat yourself with kindness. Treat yourself like you're in the ICU talking to a person that has open heart surgery. It's not your fault. You didn't do this to yourself. And you need help to get better. It's too hard. It's a biological thing, and it's an illness, and you need help to get better. And you may not want to do it, but you're valuable. Your life is valuable. You have gifts to offer the world, and you need to be here. And so you can get better. I did. It was really, really, really hard, really hard. There were a lot of tears. There was a lot of anger. There was a lot of, laying in my bed going, I don't know if I could do this. And so just for the next 5 minutes, do the best you can. It's not your fault. And I'm an example. If anything, look at me and go, well, she had it 43 years ago and she got better. So it's possible. It's possible. I never relapsed. I didn't have 43 years of roller coaster, up and down. I'm not eating. No, I went on. I learned. I had a healthy respect for food. I have a healthy respect for this illness. But I did it. I made it. I beat it. And you can do it too. You have it in you.
Okay. So what about the carer who might be really worried about, what would you say to them?
Yes. The carer, the caregiver, the parent, the friend, the boyfriend or girlfriend, partner. You may not know what to do. You're afraid because you're seeing this person waste away, or maybe if it's a bulimia or something, you see this person doing odd habits. Don't give up. Don't give up. They need you. And you may get a lot of resistance. In fact, you probably will. Don't give up, because you'll find the little time, you'll find the little slot where you can reach them. And they want to be helped. They really do. It's just that these rituals take over. And do your best to break through that. Be kind. Be meaningful in your communication. And by all means, don't trivialize it, and try not to be negative.
And with those rituals, should one respect the person who needs to have those rituals at that time? Or because it might be, you mentioned the lunchbox, for example, and I can certainly identify with that because I've seen similar things happen in others. And there would be the temptation to slip something extra in the lunchbox or just take it just in case, and all of these. How should one respond to somebody who's clinging to those rituals?
Well, the last thing you want to do is throw them a Twinkie or whatever and say, here, eat this. You look like a skeleton. One of the things the healthcare professionals did with me is they just simply put their hand on my back. And it said, you got the cliche, actions speak louder than words. And that was another one. And then the other one that we already mentioned, she just sat with me and held space. Coincidentally, in either of those, in both of those scenarios, they didn't say anything. They didn't say much, but they were there. And their actions broke through the big wall of ritual and defense and control and everything that I was in. And it's kind of like they're throwing out a rope. And again, the first 9 times I might not get it because I'm like, no, I like my control. But on the 10th time or the 12th time, it might be the one. So maybe less is more, especially when the person is resistant and they're angry and they don't want to talk and they don't want to be. Especially people, they're stuck in social media. They have a hard time face to face with people like you and I are doing. Try to use your intuition. And if nothing else, just try to show them you're there, your hand on their hand, or just simply sitting there with them.
Yeah, I think that chimes with a number of situations I've known where, both professionally and personally, where presence, even though it's silent, even though it may be resisted, even though it may not seem welcome, is a fundamental need in humans to have social contact and have others around us. And even when we're rejecting them, as you've pointed out, that nonverbal behavior can be the lifeline. And as Jordan Peterson said, and I'll tone down the expletive, but his exact words were, if somebody throws you a lifeline and you're on the suffering end of it, and somebody throws you a lifeline and you're feeling isolated and lost and all the rest of it, you damn well better grab it. So he was referring to the fact that the sufferer, the person who's feeling lost, the person who's feeling isolated and unloved and unhelped, or whatever it happens to be, still has a responsibility to eventually, as you've just said, engage with that. The carers can't do it all by themselves. The person, as you've illustrated, the person in the situation has also to recognize and grasp at those straws that are offered sometimes.
Yes, and understand that the person can't help themselves. They obviously can't get out of it. You have to help them. Use your intuition. Just let them know you're there. And again, just using my example, I could not have gotten better on my own. I absolutely needed help. And so I'm grateful and I'm thankful. And I almost feel like, I saw your, on your blog, if I'm saying this right, the kintsugi, the broken pottery, and it breaks, and then they fix it with gold, and it actually looks better. And I'd like to think of myself as an analogy for that. I mended, and I'm even better now than I was.
Brilliant. Well, you certainly sound better, and I'm really impressed by your message, and I'm really grateful. I can't remember the exact word, but I do remember that post, and I was very struck by when I found out about that. So I will put the link to the post in the description of the blog. The podcast. I'll also put the link to your book, of course. And I'm just so grateful for the time we spent speaking. And I always find these stories inspiring and empowering, but I think yours is particularly important because it seems to me that it's a neglected area.
It's there's shame around it and secrecy and silence, but awareness and visibility is building. And again, I just want to be a good example. And even if it touches one person that's hearing this in a positive way, I'll feel like I did my job. And if anyone wants to know more, there's the book.
Michele Mason, thank you very much for the time you've taken to speak to me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you very much. And thank you for this opportunity. I truly appreciate it.
All the best. This has been Get a Better Handle on Life. I'm Barry Winbolt, and I've been speaking to Michele Mason about her new book, Annihilating Anorexia. I hope you found this interesting. If you did, please like, share, or comment, or preferably all three. Details of Michele's book are in the notes to this episode, and you'll find more on my blog at barrywinbolt.com. And if you have a question, or if you'd like to appear on the podcast, contact me at info@barrywinbolt.com. Have a great day. All the best. Goodbye for now.